So, Stephen D here on Pure 24/7 Radio, and we are joined again by Bob Goody from Rural Missions. Hello, Bob.
Good morning, Stephen.
Always a pleasure to be joined by you. And last week we were talking about something of the turning points that people might try to look for when it comes to in that rural community. How do you reach it? What brings you to that turning point? We're discussing different things, and we kind of summed it up as being that mind shift change, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. And really exciting when people shift their gaze, shift their eyes from I'm stuck in this, I can't do anything more, to actually what simple adjustments could we start to make? What's God up to? Maybe we could, and start to dream a little, then like, amazing things can happen, really.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you want to talk about this week? Where are we going?
So last week I mentioned that we'd done this survey. So we recently asked a whole load of people involved in rural ministry, in rural life, to describe some of their reality. And I'll be honest, most of what came back was incredibly honest. And so I wondered whether we focused on some of the hard truths. So what are we getting wrong about rural church? What are we getting wrong about how people serve, engage, or basically how hard rural life can be? And just helping some of us and those of you listening to shift our mindset from this is how things are to maybe some of the realities of what rural can look like.
Yeah, it's very easy to underestimate some of the challenges that rural areas might face. We talked before about some of the unique challenges of a rural area, but we can very easily underestimate that. And it's really interesting to hear what people have got to say, some of that honesty, which is good.
Yeah. So one of the things that people said, one of the biggest challenges is that they're part of a system that just doesn't understand rural reality. So actually, one of the questions we posed to people was like, who is supporting you? Who are the people that are cheering you on as a church? And some people did come back and say our diocese, our denomination, other churches. But the reality for most of them, they said they felt misrepresented, that they
Okay.
felt misunderstood, that they were part of a system that was built around the big, the shiny, the population density places. And actually, rural can feel misunderstood because people think their reality is this idyllic, this beautiful, but it's not. The systems just aren't built with rural in mind. So I think that's probably one of the harshest truths that we face time and time again as we talk to them is nobody's listening to me. Anybody out there?
Yeah, I mean, with the idyllic setting that people might assume of the countryside, there is obviously a sense of loneliness, but also a lot of the same problems you might experience in an urban environment, just perhaps sometimes more intense. So it's interesting to hear about people saying, well, everyone's going to the big, as you say, the shiny. That's what people are going
Yeah.
for. And it's kind of built around that. So within, for instance, the diocese, there's going to be an emphasis on that. There's going to be pushing people towards that and that lack of support for people around them. So I presume that was quite a common message from people.
Yeah. Out of all the respondents, it probably appeared from about 75% of them
Wow.
saying that it can be really difficult and they just feel so underrepresented in the decision spaces that why should they why should they send money into the powers that be, and why should they do this? Because actually for them it's just so difficult to keep the lights on to make things work. So yeah, a good percentage feel that they don't fit.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, it's I can't say that I'm surprised to hear that, but it is something that we ought to be aware of when we see those churches in little communities, rural communities, and we see, it's idyllic and there's lots of flowers and it kind of looks very pleasant, very nice. Actually, behind those doors, a lot of challenges that are being faced, a lot of hardships.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes that's just not shown in how they receive support. So I know in previous interviews we've talked about some of the harsh realities that farmers go through and that feeling of loneliness and isolation, the bus timetables only running once a day and all those kind of bits. But I guess because we are there to support those churches primarily and to go, how do you help your whole community find and follow Jesus? That representation is key. And so we've become quite a voice across the last 2 years to really advocate and sing the praises of what God is up to in our churches in rural communities. Because I won't say where this is in the country, but there was recently a resource style church set up in a market town.
Okay.
And the whole point of this resource church was that they pumped in, I think it was around £300,000 into this church to say, appoint a children's worker, appoint a worship leader, appoint an ops manager, and all these, but with the basis to not just grow that church, but to be a support and a resource for the churches that are in the villages around you.
Hmm.
The sad reality is, talking to quite a few of those churches surrounding it, that after 3 years, as the funding is now starting to dry up, they've approached and said, would you help support us with this children's work or help us get established? Or could we have your worship leader for a week, a month, or every other month? And the sad reality is they were told no, because we've got a larger congregation that we now need to make work. And so we need their time, we need their energy. And so, despite it coming with all this joy and ceremony, like, there's a resource church to support you, the sad reality is it resourced one space and then forgot about those outlying spaces yet again. But the good news is those churches cracked on either way, and
Yeah.
they've shifted their mindsets. They've done things that took little effort, but are seeing big fruit from. So they've shifted to simpler, the relational, the things that rural communities really get right is, how do we do this together? How do we do this as family units, as streets, as people? Community life is far more distinct within rural communities than within our urban. So they have adapted, they work well, but the hard truth is that they just don't feel like they're loved like the
Mm.
bigger churches.
So I guess to a certain extent, some of these more rural communities, there's a toughness to them. They handle a lot. And as you say, despite the lack of resources from this resource church, they were actually keeping on going. And that's a toughness that you do get in rural communities, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not saying that every resource church does that. There are success stories and all of those kind of things. Please hear me right. But I just want to make sure that the voice of the voiceless almost is shared here. Because I don't think, and another hard truth about our rural communities is that it's not unwillingness to change. Sometimes it is capacity. And that's why we oftentimes focus on those small intentional changes people can make, because people do care incredibly deeply. I know story after story of churches that have heard of a need in their community with a particular family that need to go for hospital visits regular, or people not being able to get out their houses and this isolation. And people and the church have cared so deeply that they go out their way day after day, week after week to support, to serve, to love. Yes, it might stretch them, but they're willing to be stretched. So I don't think our rural churches are unwilling. I think sometimes there is a bit of a capacity issue
Mm.
where short of people, short of time, often carrying a lot. But I think if we can get people to go, how does a whole church get involved in mission? we end up carrying far less than that one or two people that seem to carry everything.
Yeah. Do you know, it's interesting. You're talking about how local churches sort of being forgotten about because you've got the bigger churches. Well, that whole like underdog story is something we see time and time and again all throughout life in all kinds of different areas and fields and industries and all kinds of stuff. It's always the bigger, more popular things that get the most support, the most
Yeah.
notice, and all the rest of it. So it's a very common thing to see. And so how those small rural churches keep on going and how they survive that problem is something that actually is true in a lot of different circumstances, not just in these rural churches.
Yeah, and we are trying as an organization, as a charity, to be sharing more and more of those stories
Yeah,
because I'm coming across churches every month where they are growing. And when I say growing, yes, it might be from 10 to 12 people or from 15 to 20, but 15 to 20 in an area where it is a very small population density is incredible. And
yeah,
that's because they've dealt with these harsh truths that they might be under supported, under resourced, lack of capacity, but they've gone, well, God's still God, God's still good, and these people still need Jesus for themselves. And so I think it's important we share every time that the Bible tells us, doesn't it? Every time someone comes back to the Father, then there's great rejoicing and the angels throw a party and all of those kind of things. And we're like, we need to start doing that more often. How
yeah.
often do we celebrate someone coming to faith, someone finding their home in our community? Like, I think rural does it well, but that story just doesn't seem to spread too far out of that community.
Yeah, what you said there about just one person. So a church goes from 10 to 12. That is huge. There's much rejoicing in heaven because of that. And we can so very easily just look for the big changes, the big success stories. Actually, those little achievements, they're not little really. They're huge. One
Yeah.
person coming to faith, one person being helped and supported by their local church. That's absolutely huge. And a lot of churches do that. You then have this huge change going throughout the world. So actually we get so caught up on the big changes, but actually those little changes. Do you have some more stories of those small just they're not small, they're huge, but where one or two people have come to faith because of small actions of a local church or they've been helped
Yeah.
in some way?
Yeah. Well, obviously, you do have one of the really big ones. So, like, I used to work for Youth for Christ for British Youth for Christ as their missions and evangelism director, and one of the first evangelists Youth for Christ had globally was Billy Graham, who's quite a well known figure. Most people have heard of Billy Graham, and potentially through his ministry, billions of people have come to faith. And the reality is, whether the story is true or not, he was the only person that came to faith the night that he did. Like it was a crusade thing. He happened to go into the tent and heard the gospel being preached. And you think a preacher would go, oh, one person came to faith. Oh my goodness. Oh, is it really worth it? And then you go, what has that person gone on to do? Like when I became a Christian, I was the only person within my group that was a soul survivor that came to faith that day. And some people might go, oh, that's lovely. Like you took 60 people away and three people became. Oh, that's not very many, is it? I would have expected more. But I'm like, since that point 25 years ago, I've spent my entire life dedicated to how do I help people find and follow Jesus and how do I equip people, Christians especially, and the church to go and do likewise. And you go, I could just be a statistic of one person, but I'm not. I'm what God's called me to. And there is many story after story of simple adjustments that churches make that don't sound incredible, but that do see fruit. So I know of a church. They again coffee. if you've not doing a coffee morning, really ought to start one, because I don't say projects are the big thing, but it does make a huge difference to a lot of communities. But they started this coffee morning, and in the last 3 years, they've had 8 people come to faith through that coffee morning.
Wow.
Like they're a village of, I think it's about 850. So not a massive space, but they opened their doors and invited people in, and
Yeah.
people have come in and found a home, and they've found hope, and they found love, they found acceptance, and in the midst of all of that, they found Jesus too, which is incredible. Like, how many people say all I've done is serve coffee and be there for people, and then 8 people have come to faith? It is that simple. We just
Yeah.
need to start sharing Jesus wherever and whenever we are.
Yeah, I think a big thing that's coming up through this conversation is how fixated people can become on statistics, on numbers, and they're
Yeah.
looking at numbers, and so that's why small churches may be forgotten because people are seeing, oh, there's only 20, that oh, that's small, or 10 or less. Where actually we need to sort of almost forget the numbers. Each individual person is unique, created by God. They are wonderful, and each and every single person has value and meaning. And when you accept that, when you look into that, a small church with 10 people, that's a lot of value there. That's 10 amazing people.
Yeah. And I think there is a reality in that. So we as Rural Missions are subscribed to every diocesan newsletter across the country. So every
Wow.
diocese produces one. So we get them to our inbox. We also subscribe to every Methodist district, every Elim, AOG. We're on all the mailing lists as much as we can. And I think for me, part of the sad reality is that as I've seen a lot of the diocesan ones come in, it says, don't forget your mission statistics are due. Make sure you send us your numbers. Make sure you send your statistics for mission are due. And it's basically how many people have been bums on seats through a month, and how many have attended this event or that event, or what kind of event it was. And I go, can you imagine if just for 3 months, every time I got a diocesan mailer, at the top it was saying, don't worry about your statistics. Who's got some stories to tell us?
Wow,
Tell
that would
me
be
your
different.
stories. Like, I think you're right. We can get so fixated on numbers, and there is a point to that. Like, people need to put energy where things are, and I get it. Like, we as a charity need to make our numbers balance, and I set targets against my team and all those kind of things. But I'm more interested when we gather as a staff team and go, what are the stories? What have the church leaders been saying? What are the church members like? How's that consultation changed the church? Rather than going, so how many more people have started to come to church because of such and such? It's lovely to know those things, but you tell me one story of a life changed over a fact or a figure, like that's going to get your heart beating, and that's going to get you then going, oh, I feel resourced, I feel loved, I feel heard, because you've not just asked for my numbers, you've asked me, how are things actually going? Tell me a story.
Yeah. Stories are so very valuable. Here at Pure 24/7 Radio, we do like share people's stories. It's a big part of what we do through radio interviews, much like this. We share stories, and what we've realized is they are so powerful. I mean, ultimately, Jesus, he told stories with parables to convey a message. Actually, sharing real life stories as well, it helps convey a message, and a message of actually things are improving, things are going well. The data points that they have value, obviously. There's a time and a place for data. There's a time and a place for statistics. But actually, the stories that you've been sharing over the past few weeks, they're some of the most amazing bits of information that come through these interviews. It's some of those stories of real life stories of people coming to faith, of people touching their communities, reaching out to their communities. So stories are so very valuable. Statistics and data have value. They do have a place, but they can be a bit over egged.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the whole start of this conversation, and some of the last one that we had, is that we've done a survey. And
Yeah,
so I am guilty of going, tell us some stuff, but actually we wanted to get some of the heart rather than the facts and the figures.
Yeah.
So we got so many responses. So half of them were telling us their church is stuck. Another half were telling us their church is full of potential. And I think that is the tension that really sums up the hard truth of it all. Like, churches are struggling, churches are thriving, and they're doing it in equal measure. And even in the same church, they're doing both. And so there is a reality that they just want to do, or I hope they just want to do what God's asking of them. And they'd love someone to be on that journey with them. And I think for me, the real issue isn't churches failing. It's often that churches are trying to do too much with too little, and they're not always fully understood in what they're up to. So if we can support them, if we can share the stories, share the hope, share the pain and the misery as well, then that's when things are going to start to shift. So there was one church that we were chatting through. They were talking of closure because they were at such a point. And actually, the minister, it was a Methodist church, they'd got a date in the diary to go to their synod to talk about and getting the cease to worship done on it. And all they did was try one small step. And that church rediscovered some of its purpose and is still open today. Like, they've not grown in numbers, but they've grown in appetite for God's church. They've grown in appetite for their community. And don't mishear, they didn't go from closing to thriving overnight, but they ended up restarting and rediscovering. And I think there is beauty in that. They've not got the numbers, but they've got the heart and they've got the story. And if we can shift our eyes again to that, then that's going to help us.
Having the heart and story, not the numbers, that is what we've kind of ended up talking about today a lot. So we started off talking about the real honest truth of what's some of the struggles of rural communities off the back of this survey. And what we've kind of ended up talking quite a lot about is how what's needed more is hearts and stories more than statistics and data, basically.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you're not in a rural area, you're not in a rural church, like, I think there is still a lot you can take from this. Like, how do we reposition ourselves? And maybe you know somebody that is in those areas. I think they would value your support. They'd value your conversation. Like, ask them how things are going. And there is a reality around our own mental health and well-being. And especially as a man, like, how many people do I have ask how my life is going and want an honest answer? You know, when you go to a church and you stood at the back and, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Maybe this is prompting you that maybe you need to reach out to someone today and go, like, how are things at church? How are things going in your relationship with Jesus? How are we sharing him in those spaces? And yeah, as always, if you'd value a conversation with someone else, you're in a rural community, or even if you're not, and something struck you and you thought, I'd love to explore that more, then do drop us a message. We'd love to journey with you, and if you've got a story to tell, we'd love to hear your story too. So come find us. We're Rural Missions, easy to find. Just put that in Google or head to ruralmissions.org.uk and get in touch. Tell us your story or how we can be part of your story.
Excellent. So I think that's a really good place to end today. Thank you so much for joining us, Bob Goody. Look forward to chatting again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And that's number 6. So we're halfway through our joyful time together. So I look forward to our next time.
Yeah, absolutely.